Okay. Good evening. Erev Tov, everyone.
Yeah.
So this week, Pashat B'chukotai. In B'chukotai Teilechu, the mitzvotai tishmor v'asitem otam. Says the Torah and Rashi famously. Always joke the first Rashi is always the famous one, but Rashi at the beginning of the parsha says, "B'chukotai Teilechu, she'tiyu amelim b'Torah." Means that you need to exert yourselves. You need to be learn Torah with toil. And amelim b'Torah. The first thing to note is that we would expect it. Maybe it's surprising to say that B'chukotai Teilechu is talking about limud Torah in the first place. We expect it to be talking about observance, mitzvot, what you do. B'chukotai Teilechu. So maybe the Mepharshim point out the fact that the continuation of the pasuk says that mitzvotai tishmolu v'asitem otam already says. It says later, but it says do the mitzvot. So clearly, B'chukotai Teilechu is adding something else, not just do the mitzvot, but also study Torah. And the second point, of course, is that Rashi doesn't just mention study Torah, but he says to you, amelim b'Torah. It has to be amal haTorah. That we know till today. That is the phrase, the buzzword, amal haTorah. Question is, what does amal haTorah mean? What does it mean that we have to exert ourselves? It has to be toil. Generally speaking, you hear this word amal, you hear exertion, you hear toil, you think of something that you have to do, something you don't want to do, something that's heavy, it's a chore, Is that what it means? When it says to you amelim b'Torah, means the greatest level of learning Torah, the greatest level of committing yourself, giving yourself over to what HaKadosh Baruch Hu said to do is do it because he said so, even though it's completely the opposite of what you want to do, and it's painful, and it hurts, and it's hard, and it's not enjoyable. Amal means, by definition, that it's not enjoyable. If you happen to enjoy it, and if you happen to get, maybe that's an ulterior motive. Maybe that's benefit. Maybe that's not the proper way of learning. Sounds a little bit funny, but this was a big controversy in the 19th century, maybe going back earlier. What is the proper way? What's the right approach? Maybe still today. But what is the right approach to Talmud Torah? So there was, we'll get to the one who argued with him in a moment, but there was the Yismach Yisrael, who's one of the Admorim in Poland. And he writes a commentary over here in Parshat B'chukotai, and he says the following. He says exactly this point. He says like this: Halomed Torah umevin umakir bepilpul svarat Torah umitaneg. Somebody who learns and understands and plumbs the depth of Torah and mitaneg. That's the key word. Right? He enjoys. He gets benefit out of it. He gets enjoyment out of it. That is not called avodah. That is not called yagiyah. That is not called amal. Right? I can see there's again nowadays. If you walk into, I think if there's any yeshiva, right? The Rosh Yeshiva gets up on the first day of Zman and says, "Chevron, you're going to sit here. You're going to suffer through the next 6 months. You're going to suffer through the next year. Anybody who enjoys themselves, go home. Leave the yeshiva." I think everybody will get up and walk, right? Not because they're enjoying, but it sounds bizarre. But this is what he says.
It's okay, right?
Huh? Yeah. So something like that. But this is what he says. It says, "Avodah gav He says the fact that a person enjoys, again, it's not you're not learning it because there's a mitzvah. You're learning it because it's what you want to do. You enjoy certain things, so that's it. And he goes on. He says what it says here in this parsha: "To you amelim b'Torah, lo l'shem ta'anug v'simcha." He says that's the definition of amal, not for the sake of enjoyment, not for the sake of simcha. That's what it is. Because it's a little bit strange because within the parsha itself, of later on, the whole idea that if there's no that one of the part of the tochacha where it comes from is due to a lack of simcha, but in any event, that's what he said. So before we mention the other side, just to show that he's not actually making this up, it's fascinating. Rabbi Osher Weiss brings here. He says both. We go back to the beginning of Chassidut and to the head of the Mitnagdim. Both of them came earlier, but seem to support this idea in a certain way. He quotes the following. It's brought in the Bnei Yissaschar. The following from the Baal Shem Tov. We'll talk about the Chassidim first. He says, "Hinei shalu talmidei Baal Shem Tov lerabam kadosh Yisrael, ma yaseh adam." This is the question. Ma yaseh adam sheyesh lo ta'anug midivrei Torah v'libo sas v'sameach. Right? What should a person do if he has he has a simcha from the fact that he's sitting and learning, brings him ta'anug. Veshiv, answer back to Baal Shem Tov. Zeu miskulat haTorah ba'atzma she'im mesamachat u'mesisa nefesh adam. That's what the Torah does. You learn properly. It's going to make you, as he said, it's going to gladden the heart. This, by the way, is one of the reasons why an Avel doesn't learn Torah. That's why on Tisha B'Av, when we're all Avedim, we don't learn Torah. We don't want, on that day, we don't want to have that simcha. He says, even though a person's intent is only to bring nachat ruach to Hashem, only to fulfill what he's meant to, it's not to get enjoyment for himself, but you're learning properly, that's what it's going to do. So first of all, there's a lot of musar here, right? You're learning properly, this is what's going to happen, you're going to enjoy. So he says, so he says at the end of the day, he says, you enjoyed it, you got the Tanuk, that's okay, right? Honest Rahmana Patra. Essentially, that's what it sounds like it's saying. So it's not your fault. It's not your fault that you enjoyed it. Okay, that's brought in the Baal Shem Tov. Now it's brought from Rabbi Chaim Volozhin. The other side, similar idea. This is in Ruach Chaim, which is his commentary to Pirkei Avot. In the third chapter of Avot, he writes the following: Chaim Volozhin, Ki hinei b'limud yesh kama pniyot. So there are a number of reasons why a person's going to learn, why a person's going to go and sit and study, right? La'avat hamamon, v'kavod, yamudu amon. There are those who sit and learn because they want money. Okay, I don't know where they're learning that they're getting money for, but anyway. But you want to become wealthy, you want to get honor, you want to get get an exemption, whatever it is. The people that are sitting and learning properly for the right reason, Ishma, there's few and far between, says Rabbi Chaim. Most people, they'll learn because it's a mitzvah, because the mitzvah of Talmud Torah. But you have your own ulterior motives as well. The person who studies, because he enjoys studying, he's an intellectual rigor, he enjoys that. Somebody who's already plumbed the depths of Talmud understands whatever other academic discipline there is in the world, you don't get the same intellectual rigor as you do from Torah Sheba'al Peh. Okay. And then he says, person learns for the right reason. Now it's interesting, there's a big discussion of poskim. What is limud lishma? And what is limud lishma according to Rabbi Chaim Volozhin? Over here, listen to what he says. He says, in other places he says slightly differently, in Nefesh HaChaim. But in any event, a person, maybe two things, maybe the same thing, but a person is learning for the purpose of learning in order to know what to do, to fulfill the Torah. Okay, and while you're learning, you're enjoying it. You're enjoying the intellectual pursuit, you're enjoying whatever it is. Just don't worry, this will not be considered a sin. Because you're learning Amanat La'asot, you're not learning Amanat Le'anot, and therefore it's okay. So these are some of the sources which kind of seem to paint a certain picture, very strange, almost bizarre picture of learning. Against that, and against that backdrop, and against that background comes the Eglei Tal. The Eglei Tal, who was also the Avnei Nezer, was the first Admor of Sochachov. He writes a number of works and shutim and responsa, and he writes a book called Eglei Tal, which is a sefer on Hilchot Shabbat. It's called Eglei Tal because Tal is Lamed Tet, right? 39 malachot, and he goes through it. A tremendous work. He goes through all the different malachot of Shabbat, etc. And he writes an introduction to that work. Fascinating introduction, a lot of different points which he discusses, and it's worth studying the whole thing. Maybe tomorrow we'll look at some of the other pieces. But in it he says the following. He has a short paragraph here. This is the famous, and he says like this: Midei dabri bo zachol is called masheshamati k'tzat bnei adam to'in miderech hasechel. So he has no patience for this. He says there are some people who think, and again, obviously, if he's writing it, he needs to write it because this was a predominant philosophy that existed. But there are people who think when it comes to limud Torateinu HaKadosha ve'amru, ki alomed u'machadesh chidushim v'sameach u'mitaneg milimudo. Person sits and learns. Not only do you learn, you come with chidushim, you're getting enjoyment. It's an honor of the ta'anug, right? Misamchei lev, as you said. So there are those who think, this is not the proper way, this is not Torah Lishma, this is a lower level of learning. As opposed to if a person was learning, right, it was amal, it was exertion, it was toil that you don't enjoy. And it's only l'shem shamayim, right? L'shem mitzvah. We spoke in Subham Rabbanan Shiur when we spoke about the meals of Shabbat. Right? So one of the reasons why the third meal, as we all know, how do you say the third meal in Hebrew? It's like Sudah Shlishit. It's often called Shalosh Sudos. Why is it called Shalosh Sudos? Because there are those who say, and it's brought down in Poskim, that in those days, the Gemara was customary, you would have 2 meals over a day. The third meal is additional, it's extra. You're not eating because you're hungry. You're eating because, as Hashem said, you have to eat the third meal on Shabbos. So the first 2 meals, it might have been, it's not Simchat Mitzvah, Simchat Kreisol. You're eating because you're hungry, and that's what you do. It's about you. When you go and you sit down and you have the third meal, so what are you saying? You're proving I'm not eating because I'm hungry, because no one's hungry when it comes to Sudah Shlishit. You're eating because that's the mitzvah, and that's what I have to do. And maybe you're showing, there are those who say that by having that, you're showing that all the meals, everything was L'Shem Shamayim. Okay, in any event. So he says, yeah, if you're learning, you're getting on, it's a ta'anug for you, that's not L'Shem Shamayim. Those who say. But this is the claim. This is the claim that you're learning, you're getting benefit. It's an ulterior motive. Says the Egleital, this is a grave error, famous error. The Adrabah, he says it's to the contrary. Not only is this not a problem, right, to get Tanug, this is the Ikar. This is what Limud Torah is all about. It's all about being happy and getting enjoyment from it. Then the words of Torah will be absorbed in your blood. Beautiful language. He says, we all know this. We all know this intuitively. When you sit and learn, you sit and do something because you have to, you're going to forget about it the first opportunity you can. But when you enjoy it, when it's something that you want to do, you feel passionate about it. So of course, that Torah is going to have much more of an impact. If you're sitting and you come to a way of learning that you enjoy, so you'll become attached to it as well. Because Chazal said, as they said, person learns what they want to learn, where they want to. They enjoy it. And he proves from the Zohar. And at the end of the day, the truth is maybe there's not. He has a paragraph here which ties everything together. This is the less famous part, but maybe it's not actually. Rav says as well. Maybe this machlokes is not as extreme as before, and maybe we need to refine exactly what the others were saying. And he says like this. He says, "Modin al-omed lo l'shem mitzvat halimud, rak mechamat sheyesh lo tanug b'limudo. Halei ze nikra limud shelo lishma." If a person doesn't believe in anything, a person rejects the authenticity of the Torah, a person rejects it, person comes, but says, there's no such mitzvah, I'm going to learn because I find this very interesting, it's intellectual, I'm enjoying it, but I'm going to walk out of it and I'm going to go and eat a cheeseburger afterwards. Okay, obviously that's shelo lishma. He says that's a problem. Etc. But a person's learning because it's a mitzvah, and then you sit down and you learn, and you have the enjoyment, and you have the ta'anug, and it's mazam chelek. Of course, that is still called amal. That is still called toil. That is still done in the way, and that's the proper way, and that is ultimately the level that we should all be hoping for and striving for.